This meeting is being recorded. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Chris Cavanero and your host for today's webinar. If by chance you miss a webinar in the future, all webinars are recorded and uploaded into the Sonicwall University as a course. You can access the recorded webinar at any time by clicking the Events Recorded Webinars tab on the homepage of Sonicwall University. We are constantly adding new webinars and content to Sonicwall University and encourage you to log in often. Thank you for taking the time to attend today's Sonicwall University webinar. During the webinar, if you should have any questions, please feel free to type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. And now I'd like to present Kelvin Peters. Kelvin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kelvin Peters. I'm a senior solution engineer for channel partners out of California and Hawaii. If you guys have any feedback or any ideas for any upcoming webinars, please drop me an email. You have my email here on the screen. And this obviously is being recorded, and we'll upload the slides for future reference into Sonicwall University. All right, so just going over the agenda, we're going to talk about, some industry trends. One big thing that, it's kind of come to light, and I get obviously a lot of, people coming to us, looking for, multi-factor authentication when it, with respect to, cyber insurance. So we're going to kind of touch a little bit on that. And then we're going to, go into, what is MFA and really why do I need it? And we'll talk about the different types of MFA available. And then we'll kind of go through, the Sonicwall product portfolio, and we'll just kind of talk through, the available options, in the various product lineup that we do have that support MFA. All right, so we just figured we'd start with, a little bit of, some of the trends that we see in cyber attacks. Obviously, it's no surprise, the numbers are up, right? This is the 2022 threat report, came right from the Sonicwall threat report. And you'll see, it's like I said, no surprise. You can see, even encrypted threats up 167%, ransomware up 105. So it's, it's obviously a trend that's, trending in essentially the wrong direction, right? So looking at some phishing attack stats. So this came from the cybertalk.org website. 15 billion spam emails make their way across the internet daily. It's pretty surprising, even when I saw that number. And 83% of organizations last year reported phishing attacks. I'm assuming it's probably closer to 100%, but these are just the people that are reporting it. In 2021, again, roughly a couple 100,000 unique phishing websites were kind of uncovered. 30% of phishing emails that end up in a user inbox are opened, right? So that's a pretty significant number. 90% of data breaches typically occur as a result of a phishing attack, right? So someone clicks on a link, it's either going to be a malicious payload or they're going to, try and phish the credentials from the end user. And, according to the FBI, phishing attacks are likely to increase by as much as 400% year over year, right? So, I mean, you take that 15 billion spam emails, I mean, whatever that represents in the phishing, 400% is, pretty significant number to kind of be looking at, right? When we talk about, we start to talk about, insurance, right? Cyber insurance obviously, is gaining momentum. You can see that, underwriters are now starting to use, questionnaires to kind of validate if you have, the certain or required security controls in place. They're even doing their own kind of scanning or pen tests against their clients to try and find some missing controls. And, cyber insurance, they're starting to mandate the use of MFA for both privileged and non-privileged users. Typically, it used to be, privileged users, were subject to MFA. So your admin on the firewall, et cetera. Those were typically, the ones that, people would suggest to have MFA on. Now, the entire organization, should be, utilizing multi-factor authentication. This is just a quick screenshot of, a sample that I've come across that, an underwriter. So this was essentially the insurance company scanning an environment. And once they, essentially uncovered an open port, this is just a snippet of, some of the controls, more specifically to the MFA portion of the questionnaire. But you can see, it's a yes or no, right? So the more no's you put on this, the less likely you're going to, qualify for a policy. So they may even revoke the policy based on, some of these questions, right? So if you say, I don't have MFA, it's likely they'll give you a period of time to, get that control in place, or, they'll just, void the policy. So it's really gaining, a lot of traction, and I think we're going to see more and more of this. And ultimately the insurance industry looks like, they'll be kind of driving, the cybersecurity business, right? Because obviously they're going to enforce controls before you can actually, qualify to even get insurance, right? So, even up front, they'll send you a questionnaire and you'll check the boxes, and based on, what you have in play in your infrastructure, that's likely going to either qualify you for a policy, and it'll also probably set the premium, right? So, some of probably the other security controls may not be a deal breaker for them, but they'll certainly inflate the premium as a result. Something interesting that, came out recently was, this is actually, I guess, the first of its kind, where Travelers Insurance wants essentially to, get out of the policy that they sold a customer, right? And you can see here, quoted directly from them, that they wouldn't have actually issued the policy if they had known the company wasn't actually, using multi-factor authentication, right? So in this case, they checked off the box saying, yeah, we have multi-factor. And then, there was a security breach. And, now they submit a claim, and essentially, the claim, it's going to be denied, right? I mean, they're certainly going to try and, get out of, paying that, right? So as the insurance company, kind of deals with a higher loss kind of ratio, the premiums likely go up, and you're going to see that they're likely going to, enforce a lot of these security controls in place, before you'll be even able to, obtain, a policy, for example. All right, so what is multi-factor authentication, right? So it really, just an authentication method that requires you to use, two verification factors, right, to gain access to a specific resource or application. It could be like a VPN, a server, etc. Maybe a web portal. There's different types of MFA. Typically, when we're talking, what we usually see, from Sonicwall perspective, is typically the first two things, which is, your password, things you have, like a smartphone or a hardware token, right? It could be email, right? Where essentially you're getting your token to come in, or a biometric, like a fingerprint, iris scan, etc., right? So these are essentially, the pieces that would kind of build a multi-factor authentication method, right? So why would I need multi-factor authentication? So this is actually, this little diagram you see on the right-hand side. This is actually from the Verizon 2022 breach report. And you can see at the very top, the very first number here, 40%, is the use of stolen credentials, right? So, there's a variety of different ways, that someone could get your credentials. It could be through a phishing campaign where they trick you into, divulging your credentials in like a web page. It could be, one of these breaches that we hear where, a whole database full of user credentials are dumped on the web, right? And you can see, this is going to really allow you to protect against things like that if you have multi-factor enabled. So for example, if we're talking about phishing specifically, if my user has multi-factor authenticated and I do, click on that link and I end up essentially, divulging my, my password, the attacker would still not be able to authenticate without having the second factor, like a token or email token, etc. even brute force attacks. Again, I mean, you can't really brute force, you know, a username that has an MFA tied against it, because, I mean, to get the password, they would have to know the token as well, right? Social engineering is also another kind of point here. Weak passwords, again, you know, if your password is password 1, right? I mean, it's essentially, you know, without MFA, I mean, that's essentially the kind of the weakest link. And again, stolen credentials, like we talked about, you know, we hear, you know, databases full of user credentials being, you know, sold or dumped, you know, on the web, right? You can see, you know, according, we just kind of mentioned that, but according to the same report, you know, 40% of those data breaches, you know, involve the use of, you know, unauthorized credentials, right? So that's, you know, this is likely, you know, the insurance companies are reading these same reports. And this is essentially, you know, why, you know, they're likely to be, you know, enforcing MFA before, you know, issuing a policy, right? All right, so now we'll kind of dive into the Sonicwall product portfolio and you know, some of the multi-factor authentication options. So this here we're talking about the Sonicwall firewall. So it has, you know, 3 primary ways that you can enable this. The first one is you know, OTP via email. So this is a one-time password, right? So, you know, the user essentially gets emailed a token, and they, you know, append that to their password, and then that's how they're able to gain access. You also have the time-based one-time password. This is, you know, more like your token, so your Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, right? So it's an application you install on your cell phone, and essentially it generates a one-time code and expires after a period of time, right? So again, you get the code, you append it to your password, which allows you to log in, right? The firewall also allows you to do some third-party integration. Typically, it's through a Radius. So if you're using something like Okta or even, you know, Azure AD, typically there's other things that you have to take into consideration in order to get this to kind of work. So in an Okta kind of setup, you would essentially need their Radius agent running on a server, and you essentially point the firewall to that that instance, and then that essentially will allow you to use whatever you set up in Okta. So Okta obviously has their own authentication, multi-factor authentication. So again, a password and a token. So again, it's typically software token that you install on a mobile device. And you can see this is a quick screenshot of where you can enable the OTP via email and the time-based one-time password. And this can be enabled on, either like a local user on the box, or if you're importing users from, you know, Active Directory, LDAP, et cetera, right? The second item, so the SMA product line. So there's 2 different flavors of the SMA, the secure mobile access. So this is more like a VPN concentrator that we do offer. And you'll see, again, you know, one-time password is another option, you know, via email. Again, you know, time-based. So that's another token installed on your phone. But you can see they also have SMS. So if you opt to enable SMS, a user would essentially get the token on their phone. You can also integrate directly natively into things like Okta and Azure using SAML. So SAML is you know, pretty popular, pretty easy to set up this as well, especially on like something like Azure AD or Okta. So this allows you to use the same credentials across the entire organization, right? So the same user that, like if you're taking Azure AD, for example, the same user credentials, password, username, and token that you would, let's say, use in Office 365 can be, you know, used as well for the VPN, right? So now the user, you know, doesn't have to remember a second set of credentials or, you know, have or possess a second, you know, token on their phone, for example. Duo is also another option, and that integrates natively into the SMA 100 series. All right, so the bigger kind of brother of the SMA 100 is the SMA 1000 So again, you'll see a lot of similarity here, with the exception, you'll see there's a couple of other options: one identity provider and RSA. So when we talk about, one identity is similar to Okta. RSA, security manager, that is essentially, where you can start to use a hardware token or a software token using the RSA security manager. And again, you can see the screenshot here. So you kind of pick the item on the list and then kind of set it up using the preferred method. All right, this is the last product in the lineup. Essentially, it's our Cloud Edge. It's essentially a zero trust framework. Again, one-time password, via email is an option. Again, time-based one-time password, so that software token. SMS is also an option. SAML, again, is an option. Duo, and you can see there's also G Suite or Google Cloud Identity as well. So this is, the Cloud Edge is essentially, something that is native to the cloud. So, what you would do is you would stitch together all your VPN tunnels in the cloud, and then give your users least privilege access to a network resource. And again, you can use these MFA options to lock it down and mitigate some of those things that I mentioned previously. Phishing is obviously predominantly one of the biggest kind of concerns that most people would kind of face, right? All right, with that said, we've kind of come to the end. So if there's any questions, drop them in the Q&A box and we can spend some time on answering some of these questions. So I see one coming in here. So it says we need MFA for the global VPN client to be the same as SSL VPN. Why isn't it implemented that way? Is Sonicwall going to add simple MFA to the global VPN client? I don't have that answer, but I can essentially look it up and I will send out an email follow-up to that question. So I can dig in and see if that's on a roadmap somewhere to get that implemented for the global VPN. All right, so we'll get a few more. I don't see any other questions coming in. Oh, here's another one. All right, so another one is there a plan to add SAML to the TZ or NSA series of firewalls? So this was actually on the roadmap for this year to actually add in SAML 2.0 into the firewall lineup. For some reason they pulled that, but I suspect it's still on a roadmap, but we're likely not to hear anything more about that until at least Q1 of next year. All right, so the next one. Yeah, so yeah, I can. So the next question is, can we see a demo of the Duo MFA integration on the SMA 100? Yeah, we can certainly do that. Let me send you an email offline, and we can set that up and walk through the integration. It's actually relatively simple to set up, and we can certainly demo that. So you can essentially, your users would use that same Duo token as they authenticate, right? So you essentially have to set up the Duo gateway on a domain controller, and that's essentially how you kind of would be able to enable that, right? So can we use Duo on the NSA firewall? So SMA. So SMA would be SMA 100 or SMA 1000. That would support Duo. If there's a Duo, let me think though, you might even be able to get that set up onto the NSA or TZ. I think Duo, with the Duo gateway, I think it's just a radius connection. So you can essentially just point the firewall to your radius instance. So that should be essentially doable as well. All right, the next one is, okay, that one's the same. So the next one is for work in the office behind the firewall and employees working from home using Net Extender. What is the most secure MFA? I think probably the most secure MFA would be, something like a hardware token, right? Because that's something that, it's kind of separate from everything. You hear, people always trying to, take advantage of MFA. So SMS, if someone takes over a mobile device, they may, gain access to, the SMS part. They might also even gain access to the software token on the mobile device, right? So a hardware token in reality is, typically, the most secure, because that's something that you physically have, and it's essentially like, it's not connected to anything, right? So no one can actually see, that token, right? So can you walk through how that option for how it would work for the employee working from home? Would the process be the same? That's interesting. Can you maybe add a little bit more color to that one? So it says, in order to implement OTP, you need to set up the email client in the login settings. Since Microsoft is depreciating basic authentication, how will Sonicwall handle auth authentication in an Office 365 environment? I'll have to look into that one, and I'll get back to you on that one. Again, I can see what changes are being planned internally, and I can get that back to you. Yeah, so another one, I guess, with the hardware token, you plug it into the USB and recognized, and then log in as usual. So some tokens work like that. While, like if you take like RSA, for example, it's a physical token that has a little screen that displays the actual numeric code, right? So not all of them, rely on you, plugging in the token, via USB. Even some of them use like, you essentially tap your phone, and that's essentially, it unlocks an authenticator on your phone, right? So it's essentially a hardware token that unlocks a software token to essentially give you, those that code for you to be able to authenticate, right? So another one is OTP via email, an option for the local primary admin account on a TZ or NSA. I've only seen TOTP as the available option. That's a good question. I believe it is. I believe you just enable that on the actual user, right? So I think you would essentially have those those two options. Like if I go back to the firewall, so you should see this. This is essentially, just being enabled on a group. It looks the same when you do it for an admin, but I'd have to double check that. I'm assuming that it is an option. That usually just both options are available for the user, right? Next question, is there a free SMS service for SMS codes to be sent? I believe there is. I can dig that up and see if I can find something for you, and I'll send that again via email. And another question, is there a way to unbind the TOTP on login screen when logging into an NSA-TZ? That's a good question. I'd have to check into that. Again, I'll send that off to you via email once I get an answer for you. So here's a good question. I mean, how would the MFA work if we turn on always on VPN, right? So this is actually kind of one of those gotchas. It doesn't work in certain scenarios, right? So you kind of have a chicken and egg on some of these devices. If you look at something like the SMA, if the always on VPN, you would essentially be blocking all the traffic, and you wouldn't allow something like, for example, if you're using integration into Azure Active Directory, right, using SAML, you're blocking that connection on the endpoint until the user authenticates. But you need to authenticate in order to have the always on VPN, right? So in some instances, that doesn't work at all, right, essentially. If you look at some of our other products, like something like Cloud Edge, that one would do it. Or if you're using, a software token, that would essentially, allow you to authenticate with the software token, right? So typically, those external authentication methods will not work with the always VPN on, just, because it's actually blocking that traffic. So I don't know if someone's ever submitted, a request for a kind of enhancement to improve that, but I can certainly take that, myself and see if we can, get that on a roadmap somewhere. All right, I don't see any more questions coming in yet, but we'll give it a couple more seconds here, and if not, we'll wrap it up. All right, well, I'll pass it back to you, Chris. I think that'll essentially do it for us. Again, thank you everyone for attending. And if you have any feedback or any ideas for upcoming webinars, let me know. And any questions that were left unanswered, just watch for an email in your inbox. I'll be, looking at these questions and sending out the information as I receive it.
Great. Thank you, Kelvin. And we'd like to thank everyone for attending today. This meeting is ended, and you may now disconnect. Have a great day.